Alrighty, big story this morning. A possible TikTok ban is just weeks away from moving forward after a ruling came down on Friday. And this morning, Tim is in Studio 61 with more on that. Tim.
Yeah, Symphony, thank you so much. Happy to be joined now by Wayne Unger, an assistant professor at the Quinnipiac University School of Law, to talk about all the different little facets of this case. And whenever we're talking about possible Supreme Court intervention, that means there are a lot of sort of discrete issues that could be looked at here. So the question is, which ones could be looked at? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, happy to be here.
Yeah, a pleasure to have you here. Okay, let's start with the impact of the ruling itself, regardless of whether or not the U.S. Supreme Court decides to take up the case. What's your take on that?
So the ruling is quite fascinating because this is the first time any court has really ruled on a ban of an entire social media platform, right? And so the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals concluded that the nation's national security interests outweigh the First Amendment considerations of banning essentially an entire social media platform where, of course, so much speech occurs.
And it sounds like on both sides of the issue here, they're expecting this to get ramped up all the way up to the Supreme Court. What are some of the deadlines, though, that are in play?
Correct. So the specific deadline is January 19th, 2025, so the day before President Trump takes office again. And that deadline is when either ByteDance, the parent company to TikTok, has to sell TikTok to another buyer or face a complete ban. And so we will most likely expect an emergency application for appeal probably this week, at the latest, I think next week, and then you'll have the Supreme Court have to take action very quickly here.
And you are expecting the Supreme Court to take up this case?
I am, because it's a novel issue, right? So we have never before, as a country, banned an entire social media platform or seek to ban an entire social media platform. And unlike other social media platforms, this one happens to be owned by China, which is a known adversary under U.S. law to the United States. And so here we have some very novel national security problems coupled with the First Amendment free speech issue. So very novel. We'll see what the court does, though.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I am certainly not an expert, but sometimes when the Supreme Court decides to take up a case, they're not taking up all of the case that the lower court necessarily decided. So does that mean if the Supreme Court takes up the case, they will be weighing those two factors, or are they going to look at maybe some part of this that's a little bit more of a discrete issue?
Right. So they'll definitely be looking at the First Amendment consideration because that is essentially TikTok's argument, right? That's the core of their argument. Now, when we break that down, there are two parts to it. One, they'll look at whether the nation and Congress has a compelling government interest with respect to placing this ban or forcing the divestiture. I think the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals got it right with respect to finding that there is a significant national security interest. And then they'll look at whether the law, which is the ban or sell kind of provision, is narrowly tailored to achieve those national security interests. So two main components there, which the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals said it passes.
And we will have to wait and see if they do that. If they do, what does that mean in terms of the deadlines for ByteDance? Does January 19th just go by the wayside?
It's possible. So the Supreme Court has several different paths it could take if it decides to hear the case. And the most likely scenario, I think, is one in which the Supreme Court puts an emergency stay on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals decision, just so that they have the chance to kind of make a formal decision as the United States Supreme Court. And if there's a stay in place, then we'll see whether the January 19th date holds.
Okay, so that's something I think we might be able to find out as early as next week, depending on when the Supreme Court decides, and we will just find out and take care of it there. But as far as where we stand here with all the possibilities and permutations, thank you so much, Mr. Unger, for taking the time to break it down for us.
My pleasure.